A terrified baby penguin came face to face with a leopard seal, nature's perfect killing machine, and did something that should have been impossible. Scientists who witnessed it were left speechless. This wasn't just an escape, it was a moment that defied everything we understand about penguin capabilities. For this tiny, defenseless chick, it wasn't just about survival. What happened in those heart-stopping seconds would change our understanding of nature forever. What this baby penguin did next, no one believed was physically possible. In the frozen wilderness of Antarctica, a baby penguin no bigger than a coffee mug waddled alone across the vast ice shelf. His downy feathers still fluffy from birth, he'd somehow strayed from his colony, a fatal mistake in this unforgiving landscape where survival depends on staying together. The deafening silence was broken only by the crunch of his tiny feet against the ancient ice and the occasional crack of distant glaciers shifting in the distance. The bitter wind howled around him, temperatures plummeting to -40 degrees, each gust cutting through his immature plumage like knives. Each step was a battle against exhaustion, his tiny body burning precious calories he couldn't afford to lose. Every minute alone drained his limited energy reserves. Reserves meant to last until his parents returned with food. Scientists watching from a distance knew the brutal truth. 9 out of 10 lost penguin chicks never survived their first day alone. The odds weren't just against him, they were practically impossible. But this little one refused to give up. Hour after grueling hour, he pushed forward, his determined eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of his family. His tiny heart pumped with a courage that seemed impossible for a creature so small and vulnerable. When he stumbled, he rose again. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he found some hidden reserve of strength that defied explanation. Researchers later noted they'd never seen such persistence in a creature so young and defenseless. What made this baby penguin's journey truly remarkable wasn't just his persistence. It was that he kept going when every instinct should have told him to surrender to the cold. His tiny brain, driven by something beyond mere survival instinct, forced his weary legs forward. Perhaps it was the primal bond to his colony, or perhaps it was something more, a spirit that refused to be extinguished by the harshest environment on Earth. Whatever it was, it kept him moving when logic said he should have perished. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ice. Soon, the brief Antarctic day would give way to a night where temperatures would drop even further. Time was running out. The little penguin needed shelter, warmth, food, none of which he could find alone on the endless ice. But what the little penguin didn't know was that something far deadlier than the cold was tracking his every move. Beneath the ice, something ancient and terrible moved through the frigid waters. A 12-foot shadow glided with effortless grace, its streamlined body perfectly evolved for one purpose: killing. This was a leopard seal, the apex predator of Antarctica and the most efficient hunter these waters had ever known. For millions of years, her kind had ruled these seas, their evolution so perfect that they remained virtually unchanged, while countless other species vanished into extinction. Her spotted coat rippled as powerful muscles propelled her through the depths at speeds of up to 25 miles per hour. Each sinuous movement was a masterpiece of evolutionary design. Not a calorie wasted, not a motion without purpose. Her serpentine neck ended in a reptilian head, housing a jaw that could dislocate like a snake's, revealing rows of 3-inch interlocking teeth designed not just to kill, but to shred. These weren't the simple cone-shaped teeth of other seals. They were specialized tools with rear-facing cusps that ensured once prey was caught, escape was impossible. Scientists have recorded leopard seals toying with prey for hours, not from hunger, but from what appears to be a chilling form of enjoyment. Marine biologists who've witnessed these displays describe them as disturbing demonstrations of intelligence paired with predatory instinct. This particular female was a veteran hunter with over 15 years of experience. At nearly 200 pounds, she was among the largest of her species ever recorded. Her scarred hide told stories of battles with rival seals, orcas, and even human vessels that had ventured too close. A jagged line across her left flank marked an encounter with a boat propeller, an injury that would have killed a lesser creature but had merely taught her to be warier of human machines. But her most impressive statistic was her hunting efficiency, 97% success rate. When she targeted prey, death was all but certain. The remaining 3% represented not escapes, but rare instances where larger prey like elephant seals managed to fight back just enough to make the hunt not worth the effort. Through specialized sensory organs, she detected the faintest vibrations in the water, the panicked heartbeat of a penguin swimming half a mile away, the subtle displacement of water from a seal pup hiding behind rocks. Her whiskers, more sensitive than human fingertips, could detect changes in water pressure created by swimming prey. Her vision, adapted for the dim underwater world, could spot movement in near darkness. Her hearing could pinpoint the location of a struggling fish from hundreds of yards away. Nothing escaped her notice. Nothing survived her hunt. As she patrolled her territory, a new scent drifted through the water, the distinctive smell of penguin. But not just any penguin. This scent carried markers of youth, inexperience, and vulnerability. The chemical signature spoke of downy, feathers not yet replaced by waterproof ones, of muscles not yet strengthened by swimming, of a body containing rich fat reserves meant to fuel growth. The seal's primitive brain processed this information instantly. Easy prey. Unconsciously, her metabolism increased, preparing her body for the burst of speed that would be needed for the ambush. The predator changed course, her powerful tail propelling her toward the scent. 15 years of instinct and experience narrowed to a single focus: the baby penguin, who had unwittingly ventured near the water's edge. She moved with deliberate slowness now, keeping her body just below the surface, her dark back blending perfectly with the depths below. Only her nostrils broke the surface occasionally, taking in air without creating ripples that might alert her quarry. The leopard seal had devoured hundreds just like him. Not a single one had ever escaped. In the evolutionary arms race between predator and prey, the leopard seal represented nature's perfect solution. A killing machine so efficient that prey species had simply never developed effective countermeasures. They survived only through numbers, knowing that many would fall to the jaws of hunters like her. As she closed in on her target, a primitive satisfaction coursed through her brain. The hunt was almost over before it had truly begun. Another meal, another day of survival in the harshest environment on Earth. The seal's muscles tensed, preparing for the explosive surge that would carry her onto the ice and into the history of yet another doomed penguin. The baby penguin stood at the edge of an ice shelf, his tiny webbed feet just inches from the dark water. Exhaustion had driven him here. A dangerous place for any penguin, let alone one so young and inexperienced. The Antarctic wind whipped around his small frame, each gust threatening to topple him into the abyss below. His once fluffy down feathers were now matted with ice crystals, providing minimal protection against the brutal cold that had already claimed countless others of his kind. He peered into the depths, perhaps instinctively searching for the silver flash of fish that might ease his growing hunger, his small black eyes reflecting the endless blue darkness beneath. What he couldn't know was that death lurked just beneath the glassy surface, watching, waiting. The water, appearing so still and peaceful from above, concealed nature's perfect killing machine, patient, ruthless, and inevitable. The leopard seal hung motionless in the water, her powerful body coiled like a spring. Years of evolutionary perfection had granted her the ability to remain almost entirely still while expending minimal energy. A critical adaptation in these frigid waters where every calorie counted, her spotted coat, usually so distinctive, now blended perfectly with the dappled shadows cast by the ice formations above. Her black eyes, cold and calculating, tracked every movement of the tiny creature above. Unlike the warm-blooded mammals of less hostile environments, her gaze held no emotion, only the ancient, primal focus of a predator assessing the vulnerabilities of its prey. She had performed this ambush hundreds of times. A sudden explosive surge upward, powerful jaws clamping around soft penguin flesh, then a violent thrashing to tear her prey apart. It was a sequence perfected over countless hunts, a deadly ballet that rarely failed. The water around her remained undisturbed, not a single ripple betraying her presence to the unsuspecting penguin above. Just as the seal prepared to strike, something unexpected happened. A thunderous crack echoed across the ice, the sound of a massive glacier calving miles away. The noise reverberated across the frozen landscape like a gunshot, disturbing the preternatural silence that had enveloped the scene. The baby penguin, startled by the noise, instinctively jumped backward, away from the water's edge. His reaction wasn't conscious thought, but rather the result of millions of years of evolutionary programming. Those ancestors who flinched away from sudden noises near water had survived to pass on their genes. Those who didn't became food. In that same moment, a human figure appeared on the horizon. Dr. Elena Winters, a 42-year-old ornithologist who had been tracking the lost penguin for hours, finally caught sight of her subject. Her face, mostly covered by a thermal mask to protect against frostbite, revealed only her eyes. Intelligent, determined, and currently wide with concern. Through her high-powered binoculars, she could see the chick's desperate situation. Alone, exhausted, and dangerously close to the water. The lenses also revealed something else. The subtle disturbance in the water that indicated a predator lurking below. Elena had spent enough time in Antarctica to recognize the signs of an impending leopard seal attack. "Hold on, little one," she whispered, though she knew the penguin couldn't hear her. Her breath crystallized instantly in the frigid air, forming a small cloud that was quickly whisked away by the relentless wind. Elena had dedicated 20 years to studying Antarctic wildlife. But professional detachment had long ago given way to genuine care for the creatures she observed. Her colleagues at the research station often teased her about her emotional investment in her subjects. But Elena had stopped apologizing for it years ago. Protocol dictated non-interference. But something about this particular chick's determination had touched her. In her 2 decades of field research, she had never seen a penguin so young travel so far alone and survive. The leopard seal, detecting the human presence, hesitated. Her primitive brain processed this new variable. Humans were not prey, but neither were they predators to be feared. They were unpredictable. Sometimes they brought machines that made painful sounds. Sometimes they watched from a distance. Sometimes they took things from the water using strange extensions of themselves. The seal remained suspended in the water, reassessing the situation. Her hunting instincts, honed to perfection over 15 years, now competed with a newer, learned caution regarding these two-legged creatures who occasionally entered her domain. The tension in her powerful muscles remained, ready to propel her forward in an instant if the opportunity presented itself. This momentary hesitation created a window of opportunity that shouldn't have existed. In the brutal equation of Antarctic survival, the baby penguin should already have been dead. Torn apart in the leopard seal's powerful jaws, his nutrients feeding the next link in the food chain. Instead, he stood blinking in the harsh sunlight, unaware how close he had come to becoming another statistic. His tiny heart continued to beat rapidly, pumping warm blood through his body in defiance of the environment that seemed determined to extinguish his life. Elena moved slowly across the ice, careful not to startle the chick. Each step required deliberate placement. A wrong move could send her crashing through thin ice or slipping on the treacherous surface. The specialized crampons attached to her boots bit into the ice, providing traction where there should be none. Her presence had inadvertently created a temporary safe zone. The seal would not attack with a human so close. But Elena knew she couldn't stay forever, and the moment she left, nature would resume its merciless course. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on her mind. The scientist in her knew that interference was forbidden, that natural selection, however brutal, was the force that had shaped these remarkable creatures. The human in her couldn't bear to watch the chick's struggle end in the jaws of death, not after he had fought so hard to survive. As she drew closer, she noticed something odd about the baby penguin. Unlike most lost chicks who huddled in place conserving energy, this one kept moving with purpose. His movements, though labored with exhaustion, maintained a consistent direction. He wasn't wandering aimlessly. He was heading in a specific direction. This behavior contradicted everything Elena knew about lost penguin chicks, who typically circled in increasingly desperate patterns until they succumbed to cold or predation. Elena checked her GPS coordinates and realized with a start that the chick was traveling in a straight line toward his colony, over 6 miles away. Without landmarks, without guidance, he had somehow oriented himself correctly. In the featureless white landscape, where even experienced human explorers had perished after becoming disoriented, this tiny creature was navigating with unerring accuracy. The implications were staggering. Could emperor penguins possess some form of magnetoreception similar to migratory birds? Was there some subtle environmental cue that scientists had overlooked? Or was this particular chick simply an extraordinary statistical anomaly? "That's impossible," she whispered, making notes in her waterproof journal with fingers stiff from cold despite her thermal gloves. Her scientific mind raced with possibilities, hypotheses forming and dissolving as she considered the evidence before her. "How are you navigating, little one?" Below the surface, the leopard seal continued to wait, her patience as infinite as the Antarctic winter. The cold that tormented warm-blooded creatures was her natural environment, and time meant nothing to her predator's brain. She had learned long ago that opportunity eventually comes to those who wait. The penguin or the human would make a mistake eventually. They always did. And when that happened, she would be ready. The stage was set for an impossible choice: Elena's scientific integrity versus the life of one extraordinary penguin chick. The research community would expect her to document, not interfere, to maintain the objectivity that formed the foundation of good science. But as she watched the determined little penguin continue his improbable journey, she found herself questioning the boundaries between observation and compassion. Was it truly ethical to stand by and watch a remarkable specimen perish when intervention was possible? Or would saving one penguin today compromise the data that might help thousands tomorrow? And time was running out. The brief Antarctic day was already beginning to wane, the sun's angle growing more oblique by the minute. Soon darkness would fall, bringing with it temperatures that would challenge even Elena's high-tech survival gear. The penguin, with his inadequate downy coat, would have even less chance of surviving the night than he did of escaping the predator below. Elena reached for her satellite phone, her decision made. Whatever came next would change everything. For the penguin, for her research, and perhaps for our understanding of these remarkable creatures who had adapted to the harshest environment on Earth. Elena's gloved fingers hovered over her satellite phone. The device represented her connection to the research station, to protocol, to the scientific method that had guided her career for over 2 decades. Making this call would mean documenting her decision, creating an official record that would follow her professional reputation forever. The small black device seemed to grow heavier in her hand as she weighed her options, the ethical scales tipping back and forth in her mind like the precarious balance of the Antarctic ecosystem itself. The wind picked up, sending ice crystals skittering across the surface in ghostly patterns that danced and disappeared like ephemeral spirits. The temperature had dropped another 3 degrees in the last hour. She could feel it in the way her breath crystallized more quickly, in the deepening numbness of her face despite the protective mask. Time was a luxury neither she nor the penguin possessed. The approaching Antarctic night would bring temperatures that would make survival improbable for the small chick, whose downy feathers provided inadequate insulation against the brutal cold. The leopard seal remained a dark shadow beneath the surface, her patience a stark contrast to the urgency of the moment. The predator's silhouette had barely moved, conserving energy with the practiced efficiency of an apex hunter who understood that opportunity was merely a matter of time. "To hell with protocol," Elena finally muttered, shoving the satellite phone back into her parka with a decisive motion. The words disappeared into the wind, but the commitment behind them remained. 20 years of careful observation had earned her the right to make this call. If her career suffered, so be it. There were other jobs, other research stations, other paths her life could take. But there was only one chance to save this remarkable penguin chick, whose navigational abilities might represent an evolutionary adaptation previously undocumented in the scientific literature. She reached into her research pack and extracted a small drone, a modified DJI Mavic designed specifically for Antarctic conditions, with insulated battery compartments and rotors engineered to function in extreme cold. The device was technically meant for aerial colony observations, allowing researchers to count penguins and monitor behavior patterns without disturbing the birds or exposing humans to unnecessary risk. Today, it would serve a different purpose. Elena's fingers, clumsy in their thick gloves, worked the controls with practiced precision born of hundreds of hours operating the device in conditions that would have grounded standard equipment. The drone hummed to life, its rotors spinning against the Antarctic air with a high-pitched whine that seemed almost sacrilegious in the pristine silence of the ice shelf. The sound caused the penguin chick to look up briefly before returning his attention to the monumental task of survival. Elena guided the drone directly over the water where the leopard seal lurked, its camera confirming what she already knew. The predator remained in position, a perfectly evolved killing machine playing the long game. With a quick series of commands, Elena activated the device's specialized acoustic deterrent, a series of orca calls recorded from the Ross sea pod, natural predators of leopard seals. The sounds had been captured during a collaborative research project 3 years earlier, when Elena had worked alongside marine biologists studying the complex relationship between orcas and seals in the Southern Ocean. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The water churned as the massive seal abandoned her hunting position, her powerful body contorting in a primal response to the perceived threat. Leopard seals feared few things in their domain, but orcas represented one of the few predators capable of turning hunter into prey. The seal dove deep to escape the threat, disappearing into the darkness below with surprising speed for such a large animal. It wouldn't keep the predator away forever. Eventually, instinct would overcome fear, especially when hunger provided sufficient motivation. But it might buy enough time. Elena approached the penguin chick carefully, maintaining a measured pace that would neither startle the bird nor expend too much of her own energy. Each step required concentration. The ice here was treacherous, with hidden fissures and deceptively thin patches that could plunge an unwary researcher into the freezing water below. She knew that additional stress could be as deadly as any predator for the already exhausted chick. The tiny bird regarded her with what seemed like suspicion, his head tilting to one side in a gesture that appeared almost quizzical. His eyes, black and inscrutable, followed her movements with an intelligence that seemed beyond his years, a reminder that these creatures had adapted to challenges humans could barely comprehend. "I'm breaking all the rules for you," she told him, her voice gentle beneath her thermal mask. The words emerged as puffs of white vapor, quickly whisked away by the relentless wind. "So, you'd better be worth it." The absurdity of speaking to the penguin wasn't lost on Elena. Anthropomorphizing research subjects was among the first taboos addressed in graduate school. Yet here, in the most remote place on Earth, the lines between observer and observed seemed less distinct, the boundaries between species less important than the shared struggle against an environment that remained indifferent to all forms of life. From another pocket, she produced a tracking device no larger than a fingernail, an experimental prototype her colleague Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto had developed at the Tokyo Institute of Marine Biology. The device represented the cutting edge of wildlife monitoring technology, with sensors capable of recording not just location, but body temperature, movement patterns, and even rudimentary heart rate data. It was solar-powered and designed to detach naturally after 3 months, when the adhesive would degrade in response to changes in the penguin's body chemistry during molting. If this penguin truly possessed unusual navigational abilities, the data would be invaluable, potentially revealing mechanisms of orientation that had eluded researchers for generations. With movements slow and deliberate, she attached the tracker to one of the chick's tail feathers, using a specialized adhesive that would bond instantly, even in sub-zero temperatures. The penguin tolerated her touch with surprising calmness, as though understanding her intentions were not harmful. Most chicks would have panicked at human contact, expending precious energy in futile attempts to escape. This one merely watched her, conserving his strength with a stoicism that seemed almost calculated. "There," she said, stepping back to observe her handiwork. The device was nearly invisible, its dark surface blending with the penguin's feathers. "Now at least your journey will mean something, whatever happens." The words were as much for herself as for the penguin, a justification for the line she had crossed, the transformation of objective observer into active participant. But Elena wasn't finished. Breaking protocol once meant she might as well break it thoroughly. From her pack, she extracted a thermos and carefully unscrewed the cap, releasing a cloud of steam that dissipated quickly in the cold air. The thermos contained a nutrient-rich fish broth, prepared by the station's nutritionist for researchers who needed to maintain caloric intake during long expeditions. She poured a small amount into a shallow depression in the ice, watching as the liquid began to freeze almost immediately around the edges. The smell immediately caught the penguin's attention, his head swiveling toward the offering with an alertness that had been absent moments before. "This isn't a free ride," Elena told him as he eagerly consumed the offering, his small beak dipping repeatedly into the rapidly cooling broth. Just enough to get you back on your feet. The rest is up to you. The rationalization felt important. She wasn't removing the penguin from the natural selection process, merely tilting the scales slightly in his favor. If his navigational abilities represented a genuine evolutionary advantage, then perhaps this intervention was justifiable in service to science, to understanding how these remarkable birds had adapted to one of Earth's most hostile environments. As the penguin drank, Elena checked her GPS again, confirming what she already knew. The colony was indeed 6 miles northwest, an impossible journey for a chick under normal circumstances. The distance would require crossing territories frequented by multiple predators, navigating treacherous ice formations, and somehow maintaining body temperature through the coming night. But with the nourishment and a head start away from the hunting grounds of the leopard seal, perhaps, just perhaps. The drone's warning system beeped, a high-pitched alert that cut through her contemplation. Elena glanced at the controller's screen to see the thermal signature of the leopard seal returning, her fear of orcas overcome by hunger and territorial instinct. The seal's body temperature appeared as a bright orange shape against the cool blues of the surrounding water, moving with purpose toward her former hunting ground. Elena had minutes, not hours. She stepped back, watching as the penguin finished the broth, his small tongue making efficient work of the remaining liquid. Already his movements seemed more energetic, his posture more alert, as the calories provided a much-needed energy boost. He looked at her once more, black eyes unreadable, then turned and continued his journey northwest. There was no hesitation in his movement, no wavering in his course, just the same, determined progress that had first caught Elena's attention hours earlier. Elena packed her equipment quickly and efficiently, her movements economical in the way that experienced field researchers learn through necessity. The seal would not attack her. Leopard seals rarely targeted humans unless provoked. But lingering served no purpose. Her job now was to observe from a distance and document everything. The penguin's progress, the environmental conditions, her own interventions. The scientific method demanded transparency, even when breaking protocol. The tracking device would activate once the penguin moved beyond her position, transmitting data to the satellite network that would eventually reach her computer at the research station. As she watched the small figure waddle determinedly across the ice, a thought occurred to her that was neither scientific nor rational. Throughout his entire ordeal, the penguin had never once called out for help during his journey. No distress calls, no begging sounds that young penguins typically use to solicit food or protection from adults. Just silent determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The observation felt significant, though Elena couldn't articulate exactly why. "I'm naming you Amundsen," she decided, after the Norwegian explorer who had reached the South Pole through sheer tenacity and careful planning. The practice of naming research subjects was another scientific taboo, another line crossed. "Don't make me regret this." The words carried the weight of her professional reputation, her scientific integrity, and something more personal. A connection to this improbable survivor that transcended the traditional boundaries between researcher and subject. 6 miles away, the emperor penguin colony continued their huddle against the elements. Thousands of birds pressed together in a constantly moving formation designed to share body heat and protect the most vulnerable members. They remained unaware that one of their lost chicks was attempting the impossible journey back to their midst, guided by some internal compass that science had yet to fully understand. And somewhere in the waters between, a leopard seal resumed her hunt. Nature's perfect predator, temporarily outmaneuvered, but never truly defeated. The great wheel of Antarctic life continued turning, indifferent to the small dramas playing out upon its surface. Elena shouldered her pack and began the trek back to her snowmobile, carefully noting her coordinates and the time of departure in her waterproof journal. The documentation was meticulous, a habit ingrained through years of fieldwork, where data integrity could mean the difference between meaningful research and wasted opportunity. Whatever happened next would be recorded, analyzed, and eventually published. She had compromised her objectivity, but perhaps gained something more valuable: a new understanding of survival against impossible odds, and possibly insights into navigational abilities that could reshape our understanding of these remarkable birds. The Antarctic sun cast long shadows across the ice as predator, prey, and observer each followed their separate paths into an uncertain future. Elena paused once to look back at the diminishing figure of the penguin, now just a small dark speck against the endless white. The tracking device had activated, its first ping appearing as a green dot on her handheld GPS. Amundsen was officially on the scientific record now. His journey no longer just a struggle for survival, but a data point in humanity's ongoing attempt to understand the natural world. "Safe travels, little navigator," she whispered, then turned toward her own destination, the human outpost that represented another kind of determination, mankind's stubborn insistence on exploring even the most inhospitable corners of the planet. The wind at her back seemed to push her forward, as if the continent itself was eager to see how both stories would unfold. 3 days had passed since Elena's intervention. Back at the Shackleton Research Station, she sat hunched over her computer terminal, eyes fixed on the blinking dot that represented Amundsen's tracking signal. The small penguin had defied all expectations, covering nearly 4 miles in his journey toward the colony. The data streaming from the tracking device told a remarkable story. Consistent body temperature despite the brutal conditions, steady heart rate, and most incredibly, unwavering directional precision that seemed almost impossible for a juvenile emperor penguin navigating alone through the Antarctic wilderness. "You're going to wear out that monitor if you stare any harder," said a voice behind her, the words carrying a hint of amusement tinged with professional concern. Elena didn't need to turn to recognize Dr. Marcus Chen, the station's senior biologist and, technically, her supervisor. His footsteps approached until he stood beside her, his own gaze drawn to the tracking data displayed across multiple screens. The primary monitor showed Amundsen's location against a topographical map of the region, while secondary displays presented vital statistics and environmental conditions. A complete picture of one small penguin's struggle against one of Earth's most hostile environments. "I should report you, he said. But there was no malice in his voice. The words were delivered with the resigned tone of a mentor who had seen enough brilliant researchers to recognize when rules needed flexibility. Interfering with wildlife, unauthorized use of equipment, solo expedition without proper clearance. The ethics committee would have a field day. "I filed the report myself yesterday," Elena replied, finally looking up at him. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her lack of sleep, the price of spending nights monitoring data that might reveal either triumph or tragedy at any moment. "Full disclosure, they can censure me if they want, but I won't pretend I didn't make a deliberate choice." Marcus nodded, pulling up a chair beside her. At 58, with salt and pepper hair and weathered features that spoke of decades spent in extreme environments, he had spent more time in Antarctica than almost anyone at the station. The fine lines around his eyes had been earned through countless expeditions, his reputation built on meticulous research and occasional calculated risks. He'd seen researchers come and go, careers made and broken on the ice, and had developed an instinct for distinguishing between recklessness and necessary scientific courage. The ethics committee might have something to say, but the data. He gestured toward the screen, where Amundsen's vital signs displayed remarkable stability despite the harsh conditions. Elena, this is unprecedented. We've never documented this kind of navigation in a juvenile emperor. The implications for understanding magnetoreception in these birds could be groundbreaking. If this chick is somehow sensing the Earth's magnetic field with a precision we thought impossible for his species and age. Elena allowed herself a small smile, the first in days. The validation from someone of Marcus's stature meant more than she cared to admit. So, you're saying my career isn't over? That I won't be relegated to analyzing ice core samples in some basement lab for the rest of my professional life? I'm saying you might have stumbled onto something important enough to justify bending the rules. He paused, studying the tracking data more carefully, his experienced eyes noting patterns that would escape less seasoned researchers. Though I'm curious why you didn't just transport the chick back to the colony yourself. Would have been simpler, safer for the penguin, and less professionally risky for you. A quick snowmobile trip, drop him off at the colony's edge, and no one would have questioned a simple rescue operation. Elena shook her head, her expression hardening with scientific resolve. And learned nothing in the process. If Amundsen makes it back on his own, we'll have documented something truly extraordinary. A navigational capability that could change our understanding of avian cognition and spatial awareness. If he doesn't, she let the sentence hang unfinished, the unspoken alternative hanging in the air between them. Nature takes its course, Marcus completed for her, the words carrying the weight of scientific objectivity that all field researchers eventually had to embrace. The scientist in me approves, even if the soft-hearted old man doesn't. We're here to observe and understand, not to rescue every creature that faces the brutal reality of Antarctic survival. The tracking software emitted a soft alert, a gentle chime that immediately drew both researchers' attention. Amundsen had stopped moving. The green dot that had been making steady progress now remained fixed on the digital map. Both researchers leaned forward, tension evident in their postures, the momentary philosophical discussion forgotten in the face of potential crisis. He's been stationary for 15 minutes, Elena noted, quickly checking the vital signs displayed on the secondary monitor. Body temperature normal, heart rate elevated but within expected parameters for a penguin his size. No signs of physiological distress that would indicate injury or illness. Resting, perhaps, Marcus suggested, but his tone lacked conviction. Even juvenile emperor penguins rarely stopped for extended periods during transit. Their survival depended on efficient movement between protected areas. Stillness often meant vulnerability to predators or environmental threats. Elena overlaid the tracking data with topographical maps of the region, her fingers moving across the touchscreen with practiced precision. The composite image revealed Amundsen's position relative to the terrain features ahead. He's at the edge of the pressure ridge zone. Difficult terrain ahead, possibly impassable for a chick his size. The pressure ridges were among the most dangerous features of the Antarctic landscape. Massive ice formations created when sheets of ice collided, forcing jagged barriers upward like frozen waves frozen in mid-crash. These formations could extend for miles, creating natural walls that even human explorers approached with caution. For a human, navigating them required specialized equipment and experience. For a penguin chick weighing less than 15 pounds, with no tools beyond his own body and instincts, the challenge seemed insurmountable. He'll need to find a path through or around. Marcus said, his scientific curiosity now fully engaged. Even adult emperors struggle with the pressure ridges. They typically avoid them entirely during migrations, taking longer routes across flat ice. The fact that he's approached them directly suggests his navigational system, whatever it is prioritizing directional accuracy over terrain difficulty. Elena nodded, feeling the weight of her intervention settling more heavily on her shoulders. Had she merely prolonged the inevitable? Given Amundsen false hope and temporary strength only to have him face an impassable barrier? The scientist in her knew that such questions were irrelevant. The experiment was in progress, and the outcome would provide valuable data regardless of whether the penguin survived. The human in her, the part that had named the chick after one of history's greatest explorers, couldn't help but hope for success against overwhelming odds. "I'm going back out," she announced suddenly, pushing back from the computer station with decisive energy. Marcus straightened, his expression shifting from scientific curiosity to administrative concern. "Elena, you can't interfere again. Once was already pushing ethical boundaries. A second intervention would compromise the entire study and potentially end your career. The committee would have no choice but not to interfere," she clarified, cutting off his objection with a raised hand. "To observe, document. This is a unique opportunity to study problem-solving behavior in a juvenile emperor facing complex terrain challenges. The station's drone can only provide aerial footage. I need to see this up close. Record his decision-making process, his adaptations to the obstacles. This could be a once-in-a-career opportunity." Before Marcus could object further, the tracking software chimed again, drawing their attention back to the screen. Amundsen was moving once more, but not in the expected direction. Instead of continuing northwest toward the colony, he had turned due west, parallel to the pressure ridge rather than toward it. "He's deviating from course," Marcus noted with concern, his scientific training automatically interpreting the change as a potential failure of the penguin's navigational system. Disorientation, perhaps? Or maybe he's detected a predator ahead and is taking evasive action. Elena studied the map more carefully, her brow furrowed in concentration. Then understanding dawned, her eyes widening with the realization. "No, he's not lost or confused. Look." She traced a line with her finger along the topographical overlay. If he continued straight, he'd hit the worst part of the pressure ridge, a vertical wall nearly 15 feet high with no passages. This western detour will take him to a natural break in the formation, a point where two ice sheets haven't fully compressed against each other. It's actually the optimal route, the path of least resistance that still maintains his overall directional goal. Marcus leaned closer, his scientific curiosity overcoming his administrative concerns as he analyzed the terrain data. That's remarkable. How could he possibly know that? Even with our satellite imagery and topographical mapping, it took us both a moment to recognize the strategic advantage of that route. A juvenile penguin shouldn't have the cognitive capacity to plan routes around obstacles he can't yet see. That's what I intend to find out. Elena was already standing, gathering her field equipment with practiced efficiency. Each item went into her expedition pack in a specific order, the result of years spent learning which equipment might be needed first in emergency situations. I'll take Snowmobile 2 and the long-range radio. Standard safety protocols, continuous communication, emergency beacon active at all times. This isn't about intervention anymore. It's about documenting what could be an evolutionary adaptation we've never observed before. Marcus sighed, recognizing the determination in his colleague's face. It was the same expression he'd seen in the mirror decades earlier, when his own research had pushed boundaries and challenged established understanding of Antarctic ecosystems. The committee is definitely going to have questions about this, you know. Multiple expeditions to track a single penguin isn't standard protocol, even for a potentially groundbreaking observation. Then we'd better make sure the research is worth it. Elena paused at the door, her expression softening slightly as she recognized the risk Marcus was taking by not explicitly forbidding her expedition. I'll transmit hourly updates and full video documentation. If Amundsen can navigate the pressure ridges successfully, it changes everything we think we know about penguin cognition and spatial awareness. This could be the cornerstone of our understanding of avian navigation for the next generation of research. Be careful out there, Marcus called after her, his voice carrying both professional concern and personal worry. The weather report shows a system moving in from the east. Could get nasty by tomorrow afternoon. Even the most important scientific observation isn't worth risking human life. Elena nodded, already mentally preparing for the expedition. The Antarctic environment demanded respect from every creature that ventured across its surface, human researchers included. As a scientist, she had been trained to observe, not interfere. But sometimes, observation itself required extraordinary measures, calculated risks taken in service to knowledge that might otherwise remain forever hidden beneath the ice. Whatever happened next, Amundsen's journey had already expanded the boundaries of their understanding, proving that in the harshest environment on Earth, life found ways to adapt, survive, and occasionally astonish those who dedicated their lives to studying its mysteries. As she prepared the snowmobile in the station's equipment bay, methodically checking each system and loading her observation gear, Elena glanced at her tablet one last time. The small green dot continued its westward movement, slow but steady against the white background of the digital map. Somewhere out on the ice, a tiny penguin was attempting the impossible, guided by mechanisms that science had yet to fully comprehend. And now, the scientific world was beginning to watch, as Elena's preliminary data had already been transmitted to collaborating researchers at institutions around the globe. What had begun as one researcher's impulsive intervention had become something larger, a window into evolutionary adaptations that might have remained hidden for decades without Amundsen's remarkable journey. The pressure ridges loomed like a frozen fortress on the horizon, jagged spires of ice reaching 20 feet into the air in some places, their surfaces catching the low Antarctic sunlight in ways that transformed them from barriers into sculptures of extraordinary beauty. Elena cut the snowmobile's engine half a mile away, not wanting the noise to disturb the penguin or attract predators that might be hunting in the area. From here, she would proceed on foot, using the specialized ice crampons that allowed researchers to traverse difficult terrain without risking falls that could prove fatal in the isolated wilderness. Through her high-powered binoculars, she scanned the ice field methodically, searching for the small black form against the endless white. The tracking data indicated Amundsen was approximately 300 yards ahead, at the edge of the first pressure formation. But visual confirmation remained essential. Technology could fail. Direct observation was the foundation of field biology for good reason. Finally, she spotted him, a tiny dark figure. Momentarily still, facing the imposing ice barrier that stretched across the horizon like a frozen tsunami captured in mid-surge. Elena set up her observation equipment with practiced precision. The high-definition camera with telephoto lens mounted on a carbon fiber tripod designed to remain stable in high winds. The directional microphone designed to capture sounds at extreme distances. The weather monitoring station that would record environmental conditions throughout the observation period. Each piece of equipment represented the cutting edge of field research technology, tools that allowed scientists to document phenomena without direct interference. The ideal balance between technological advantage and minimal impact observation. Through the camera's viewfinder, she watched as Amundsen approached the first ice ridge. The chick seemed to hesitate, his small head moving side to side as if assessing the obstacle before him. The movement wasn't random, but appeared deliberate, almost analytical in its methodical survey of the terrain. Then, with a determination that seemed almost human in its purposefulness, he began following the base of the ridge, moving westward just as the tracking data had indicated, maintaining a consistent distance from the ice wall as if following an invisible path. "Remarkable," Elena whispered, narrating into her digital recorder for the official research log. Subject is demonstrating what appears to be deliberate navigation around obstacles, not random movement or trial-and-error behavior, but purposeful route finding with apparent awareness of terrain features. Behavior suggests cognitive mapping capabilities previously undocumented in juvenile emperor penguins. For the next hour, she documented Amundsen's progress along the pressure ridge, noting each pause, each change in direction, each moment when the penguin appeared to assess multiple options before selecting a specific route. The chick moved with surprising efficiency, conserving energy when possible, pushing forward with determined bursts when necessary. Twice he encountered dead ends where the ice formations created impassable barriers, and both times he backtracked and found alternative routes with minimal wasted movement, behavior that suggested not just instinctive response, but actual problem-solving capability. As the light began to fade, the brief Antarctic day already giving way to the long twilight that preceded total darkness, Elena faced a decision that pitted scientific opportunity against safety protocols. Standard procedure required researchers to return to the station before dark, but leaving now meant missing crucial observations. Amundsen was approaching what appeared to be a narrow passage through the pressure ridge, a potential breakthrough in his journey that might reveal even more about his navigational capabilities. The radio crackled to life, breaking the pristine silence of the Antarctic wilderness. "Elena, this is Marcus. Weather system is accelerating faster than predicted. You need to head back now. Satellite imagery shows the front moving directly toward your position. Over." She glanced at the horizon, where dark clouds were indeed gathering more quickly than the morning forecast had predicted. Antarctic storms could develop with frightening speed, transforming clear conditions into zero-visibility blizzards within hours. Even experienced researchers had perished after being caught unprepared by the continent's notoriously volatile weather patterns. "Acknowledged," she responded, pressing the transmit button with reluctance evident even in that single word. "Requesting 30-minute extension to document critical behavioral sequence. Subject is approaching potential passage through pressure ridge. Data could be essential to understanding route selection process. Over." There was a pause before Marcus replied, his voice tight with concern that transcended professional responsibility. In the decade they had worked together, Elena had never heard that particular tone, a recognition of genuine danger that overrode scientific opportunity. 30 minutes, Elena. Not a minute more. That storm looks nasty, and it's moving faster than anything we've seen this season. Temperatures expected to drop another 15 degrees when it hits. Over." "Understood. We'll transmit continuous location data and maintain emergency beacon active status. Over and out." She returned her attention to the camera, where Amundsen had reached the narrow passage she had identified earlier. The opening was barely wider than the penguin himself, a crevice between two massive ice formations that might, just might, provide a path through the ridge that would allow him to continue his journey toward the colony. The chick paused at the entrance, as if considering the risks inherent in the narrow passage. Predators sometimes use such natural funnels as hunting grounds, lying in wait for prey that had no escape route once committed to the confined space. Even without predators, the passage itself might narrow further or dead-end entirely, trapping the penguin in a situation with no room to turn around. A potentially fatal mistake in an environment where energy conservation meant the difference between life and death. "What will you do, Amundsen?" Elena whispered, her scientific objectivity momentarily forgotten in the drama of the moment. The question wasn't just academic curiosity. It represented a genuine test of the penguin's cognitive capabilities. Would he risk the unknown passage or seek an alternative route with less immediate danger but potentially greater energy expenditure? As if in response to her unheard question, the penguin made his decision. With a determined waddle that seemed to convey confidence rather than desperation, he entered the crevice, disappearing from Elena's direct line of sight between the towering ice walls. She quickly adjusted her position, moving laterally to find an angle that would allow her to continue observation without losing sight of her subject. The wind was picking up now, carrying the first icy particles that heralded the approaching storm, microscopic daggers that stung any exposed skin and foretold the harsher conditions to come. Through the camera's telephoto lens, she relocated Amundsen, now about 10 feet into the passage. The crevice remained narrow but navigable, winding between the towering ice formations like a frozen river cutting through mountains of ice. The penguin moved steadily forward, occasionally pausing to assess the path ahead, but never hesitating for long. Each decision made with a certainty that seemed impossible for a creature so young and inexperienced. Elena checked her watch. 15 minutes of her extension had already passed. The storm clouds were visibly closer, the wind strengthening by the minute, transforming from occasional gusts to a steady pressure that threatened the stability of her observation equipment. Professional responsibility warred with scientific curiosity as she watched Amundsen navigate the treacherous passage, each step potentially revealing new insights into avian cognition and spatial reasoning. Just as she was about to begin packing her equipment, accepting that safety must take precedence over even the most valuable observation, the penguin emerged from the other side of the pressure ridge. He had done it. Found and successfully navigated a path that even experienced human explorers might have struggled to identify without technological assistance. The tracking data confirmed what Elena could see through her camera. Amundsen was now back on his northwestern trajectory, the most direct route to the colony, as if the pressure ridge had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience in his predetermined journey. Final observation note. Elena spoke into her recorder as she hurriedly disassembled her equipment. Each piece returned to its protective case with the efficiency that extreme environments demanded. Subject has successfully navigated pressure ridge obstacle using what appears to be strategic route planning and problem-solving behavior. Movement patterns suggest spatial cognition capabilities previously undocumented in juvenile emperor penguins. Further research essential to determine whether this represents individual anomaly or unrecognized species capability with evolutionary significance. The radio crackled again. Marcus's voice, now urgent, all pretense of calm professionalism abandoned. "Elena, storm front accelerating beyond all predictions. You need to move now. Visibility at the station already dropping, and you're directly in the path. Over." "On my way," she responded, securing the last of her equipment in the specialized containers designed to protect sensitive technology from Antarctic conditions. Before turning to leave, she took one final look through her binoculars, focusing on the small figure now moving steadily away from the pressure ridge. Amundsen was already a small dot in the distance, continuing his improbable journey toward home with the same determination that had carried him through every obstacle thus far. As Elena mounted the snowmobile and turned toward the research station, she felt a complex mix of emotions. Scientific excitement at the data collected, professional concern about the approaching storm, and something less easily categorized. A sense of connection to the small creature whose determination mirrored the human drive to explore, to overcome, to return home against all odds. Both she and Amundsen were, in their own ways, pushing the boundaries of what their species could achieve in this most hostile of environments. The snowmobile's engine roared to life, its headlights cutting through the gathering gloom as visibility deteriorated rapidly. Elena set the GPS for the direct route back to Shackleton Station, knowing that every minute might matter as the storm closed in. Behind her, a tiny penguin faced the coming storm with nothing but instinct, determination, and perhaps something more that science had yet to fully understand or explain. Ahead lay the human outpost with its warmth, safety, and the collective knowledge of a species that had also learned to survive in environments for which they were not naturally adapted. Two journeys, parallel but distinct, continued across the Antarctic ice as the storm clouds gathered overhead. One guided by technology and rational decision-making, the other by mechanisms still mysterious to those who studied them. In both cases, survival depended on adaptability, determination, and the capacity to find paths where none seemed to exist. As the snowmobile accelerated across the ice field, Elena couldn't help but wonder which traveler, human or penguin, was truly the more remarkable in their adaptation to this frozen world at the bottom of the planet. The blizzard descended upon Shackleton Research Station with a fury that even veteran Antarctic researchers found unsettling. Winds exceeding 80 miles per hour howled around the reinforced structures, driving snow and ice against windows designed to withstand the continent's worst conditions. Inside the main research building, Elena stood before the wall of monitors in the observation center, her eyes fixed on the small blinking dot that represented Amundsen. "He's still moving," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm's distant roar. How was that possible in these conditions? Marcus stood beside her, his face illuminated by the blue glow of the screens. Adult emperors huddled during storms like this. They form massive groups to conserve heat and energy. A lone juvenile shouldn't be able to maintain body temperature, let alone continue traveling. Yet the evidence was undeniable. While the storm had forced all human activity to cease, Amundsen continued his northwestern journey, his pace slower but still steady. The tracking device showed his vital signs remained stable. Heart rate elevated but consistent. Body temperature maintaining the narrow range necessary for survival. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Sofia Rodriguez, the station's meteorologist, said as she joined them at the monitoring station. "He's moving directly through the heart of the storm, not seeking shelter or protection. It defies everything we know about penguin behavior during extreme weather events." Elena nodded, her scientific mind racing to formulate hypotheses that might explain the inexplicable. What if the storm itself is providing information he's using for navigation? Wind patterns, pressure differentials, electromagnetic fluctuations associated with the weather system. That would represent an entirely new understanding of avian navigation. Marcus replied, his initial skepticism now replaced by genuine scientific curiosity. "We know some birds can sense barometric pressure changes, but using an active storm system as a navigational aid would be unprecedented." Sophia pulled up additional meteorological data on an adjacent screen. The storm's eye is moving southeast at approximately 22 miles per hour. If your penguin is somehow using the storm structure for orientation, he's doing so with remarkable precision. The three researchers fell silent, watching as the small green dot continued its journey through the digital representation of the howling maelstrom outside. Around them, the research station creaked and groaned under the storm's assault, a reminder of humanity's tenuous foothold in this most extreme environment. "I need to compile everything we have," Elena said finally, breaking the silence. "Tracking data, meteorological conditions, topographical information. Everything that might help explain what we're witnessing. If Amundsen is demonstrating previously undocumented navigational capabilities, we need to understand the mechanisms involved." Marcus nodded. "I'll contact our collaborators at Cornell and the British Antarctic Survey. This could have implications beyond emperor penguins, potentially affecting our understanding of avian navigation globally. And I'll provide complete atmospheric data for correlation with his movement patterns," Sophia added. "If there's a connection between the storm dynamics and his navigation, we should be able to identify it with enough computational analysis." As her colleagues dispersed to their respective tasks, Elena remained before the monitors, watching the small dot that represented so much more than a single penguin. Amundsen had become a window into evolutionary adaptations that humans had never before witnessed. Capabilities that might have remained hidden without the chance encounter that had brought him to her attention. "Keep going, little navigator," she whispered to the screen. "Show us what you know." 3 days later, the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of newly formed drifts and sculpted ice formations. The Antarctic sun shone with deceptive brightness, illuminating a world that remained among the most hostile on Earth despite its pristine beauty. In the station's main conference room, an unprecedented gathering had assembled. In addition to the station's permanent research team, the room contained holographic projections of scientists from 6 continents. Experts in avian biology, navigation, meteorology, and evolutionary adaptation who had been drawn into the growing phenomenon that researchers were now informally calling the Amundsen event. Elena stood at the front of the room, surrounded by data displays showing the penguin's remarkable journey. As of this morning, Amundsen has covered approximately 5.7 miles of his journey to the colony. Based on his current trajectory and pace, he should reach the colony perimeter within 36 hours. "And he maintained forward progress throughout the entire storm?" asked Dr. Hiroshi Yamamoto, appearing as a holographic projection from Tokyo University. "With no shelter or protection?" "None that we could detect," Elena confirmed. "His path shows no deviation toward potential shelter locations. He simply continued, as if the storm were irrelevant to his journey." Dr. Lenora Washington, a renowned expert in avian navigation from MIT, leaned forward in her projected chair. "The data suggests he's not simply using magnetoreception like most migratory birds. The precision of his navigation exceeds anything we've documented in avian species, particularly considering his age and inexperience." "Could it be a form of quantum entanglement?" suggested Dr. Mikhail Sokolov from the Russian Academy of Sciences. "Recent studies have shown some migratory birds may use quantum effects in cryptochromes to detect magnetic fields with extraordinary sensitivity." The discussion continued, theories proposed and debated as the assembled scientific minds grappled with the implications of what they were witnessing. Through it all, Elena found herself returning to the simplest and yet most profound question. How did a juvenile emperor penguin, alone in one of Earth's most hostile environments, navigate with greater precision than the most sophisticated human technology? As the meeting concluded, Marcus approached Elena with an expression that combined excitement with hesitation. "The committee has made a decision about your field observation request." Elena tensed. She had submitted a formal proposal to observe Amundsen's arrival at the colony, a final piece of documentation that would complete the record of his extraordinary journey. Given her previous protocol violations, she had expected resistance. "They've approved it," Marcus continued, "with conditions. You'll be accompanied by Dr. Rodriguez as a secondary observer, and under no circumstances are you to interfere with the penguin's integration into the colony, regardless of how he's received by the adult birds." Relief washed over her. "Understood. Observation only. No intervention." Marcus nodded, then lowered his voice. "Elena, whatever happens when Amundsen reaches the colony, whether he's accepted or rejected, this journey has already changed our understanding of these birds forever. You were right to make the choice you did, even if it wasn't by the book." "Thank you," she replied simply. From Marcus, such an acknowledgement carried particular weight. "We'll depart at first light tomorrow. That should put us in position well before Amundsen reaches the colony perimeter." As Marcus walked away, Elena turned back to the monitoring screens, where the small green dot continued its unwavering progress. Tomorrow would bring the conclusion of a journey that defied scientific explanation, and perhaps the beginning of a new understanding of life's capacity to adapt, evolve, and occasionally astonish even those who dedicated their lives to its study. The Emperor Penguin Colony appeared first as a dark smudge against the white horizon, gradually resolving into thousands of individual birds as Elena and Sophia approached in their snowmobile. They stopped at a predetermined observation distance, close enough to document interactions with high-definition equipment, but far enough to minimize human impact on natural behaviors. Colony count is approximately 3,200 individuals, Sophia noted, scanning the gathering with specialized binoculars. Typical formation for this time of year, with breeding pairs maintaining the central positions and non-breeding adults at the periphery. Elena nodded, setting up her observation equipment with practiced efficiency. The tracking data showed Amundsen was less than half a mile away, approaching from the southeast at his now familiar steady pace. After nearly a week of extraordinary journey, the final moments were at hand. "There," Sophia said suddenly, pointing toward a small dark figure emerging from behind an ice formation. "Visual confirmation." Elena swung her camera toward the indicated position, the powerful lens bringing Amundsen into sharp focus. The juvenile penguin appeared remarkably healthy despite his ordeal. His movements strong and purposeful, his feathers properly aligned. Without knowing his history, no observer would guess this small bird had just completed a journey that should have been impossible by every scientific measure. "He's maintaining direct course toward the colony," Elena narrated for the official record. "No hesitation or exploratory behavior. Movement suggests specific destination rather than general orientation toward the group." As they watched, Amundsen approached the colony's outer perimeter, where non-breeding adults stood in loose formation. The juvenile slowed his pace slightly, but continued forward with the same determination that had characterized his entire journey. The adult penguins nearest his approach point turned to observe the newcomer, their behavior now the focus of Elena's documentation. Adult response appears to be standard investigatory behavior, she noted. No aggressive posturing or territorial displays thus far. What happened next defied all expectations. Rather than stopping at the colony's edge or integrating with the peripheral birds, as would be typical for a juvenile, Amundsen continued directly into the colony. moving with unwavering purpose toward the center where the breeding pairs maintained their positions. The adult birds parted before him, creating a path that seemed almost ceremonial in its precision. "This is unprecedented," Sophia whispered, her scientific detachment momentarily forgotten. "They're acknowledging him as if he has priority access to the colony center." Elena could only nod, her attention fixed on documenting every moment of the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. Through her camera lens, she watched as Amundsen reached the colony's heart, where the oldest and most established pairs maintained the most protected positions. There, he stopped before a specific pair of adult emperors who stood slightly apart from their neighbors. The moment of contact transcended scientific observation. The adult female, distinguishable by subtle plumage differences, bent her head toward the juvenile in a gesture that even the most objective observer would struggle not to describe as recognition. The male followed suit, and for a brief moment, the three penguins formed a tableau that struck Elena with its emotional resonance. "Family reunion," Sophia said softly. "He found his parents." Out of more than 3,000 birds, he navigated directly to his specific family unit. "That's not possible," Elena replied automatically, the scientist in her rejecting what her eyes were clearly witnessing. Emperor penguin parents don't recognize their offspring after separation. The research is conclusive on this point, and juveniles certainly can't identify specific adults after prolonged absence. Yet the evidence before them challenged decades of established understanding. Amundsen had not simply returned to the colony. He had navigated to the exact location of his parental pair, with a precision that no known mechanism could explain. As they continued to observe, the juvenile integrated seamlessly into the family unit, his movements synchronized with those of the adults in ways that suggested not chance, but recognition, not random acceptance, but specific belonging. "We need to reconsider everything," Elena said finally, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were witnessing. "Not just about navigation, but about recognition, memory, and communication in these birds. Whatever guided Amundsen home wasn't just a generalized sense of direction. It was something far more specific and profound." Sophia nodded, her expression reflecting the mixture of scientific excitement and humility that came with witnessing something that expanded the boundaries of understanding. Some questions in science aren't answered with more precise measurements or larger data sets. Sometimes we simply encounter phenomena that require us to acknowledge the limitations of our current frameworks. As the Antarctic sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the ice, Elena continued her documentation of Amundsen's integration into the colony. The tracking device would continue to transmit data for another 11 weeks before naturally detaching, providing unprecedented insights into the social structures and dynamics of emperor penguin family units. But the most profound insights had already been revealed. Not through data points or statistical analysis, but through the simple observation of one small penguin who had accomplished the impossible. In doing so, he had reminded human observers that life's adaptations sometimes exceeded the explanatory power of current science. Not because the explanations didn't exist, but because humans had yet to ask the right questions. As Elena and Sophia packed their equipment for the return journey to Shackleton Station, they took one final look at the colony where Amundsen had found his place. Among thousands of seemingly identical birds, he had navigated to the exact location that represented home, guided by mechanisms that science would now strive to understand. The best discoveries, Elena reflected as they mounted the snowmobile, don't provide definitive answers. They open new questions we never thought to ask. The engine roared to life, and the two researchers began their journey back to the human outpost that represented their own adaptation to this frozen world. Behind them, a small penguin who had expanded the boundaries of scientific understanding settled into the colony with his family, his extraordinary journey complete, but its implications just beginning to unfold across the scientific community worldwide. In the vast white expanse of Antarctica, where life existed at the very edge of possibility, one small bird had demonstrated that evolution solutions sometimes remained hidden until chance, circumstance, and human curiosity converged to reveal them. For Elena, the true journey, understanding the mechanisms behind Amundsen's remarkable navigation, was just beginning.